Hey everybody, welcome. We're going to get started here in a minute or two. Thanks for joining us. If you're here for the value of networks and accelerating climate action, you are in the right place, not another random Zoom room that you happened upon. So congratulations for accomplishing something on a Monday. We'll get started in a sec. Okay, welcome everybody. Thanks for joining us today on maybe your lunch break, maybe your breakfast break, maybe your, I don't know what other breaks there might be, but dinner break if you're in a different time zone. Thanks for joining us. My name is Tim Carter. I'm president of Second Nature. We're going to be talking today about the value of networks in accelerating climate action. And we have an hour to do that. A few logistical things before we get started here. One is this program is being recorded. I know some of the sessions we've had recently at Second Nature have not been recorded. This one is recorded. So you'll get a link after the webinar is over so you can watch it again and share it with colleagues. And then we'll also be posting this to, I think it's our YouTube channel once it's done. There is I believe, a question and answer function in the chat, and we will, or in the bottom screen for Zoom. So that's the way we would love to capture questions from you, and we will have time about 3/4 of the way through to address those questions. So please do, as questions come up, put them down, and we'll capture them, try to get through them at the end. Everyone's on mute, so you can't talk. There's good reasons for that, but we'd love to hear from you in written form. So thank you for joining us. Meredith, is there anything I'm missing? Because I always screw up this part of it.
You're doing great. I think you hit all the important points.
Okay, thank you. One first introduction is Meredith Lee, who many of you probably know. She's a climate programs manager of ours. It's really helping support this webinar and supports many of you in your climate action journeys. So she'll be helping out with some of the questions as we go along. Okay, I wanted to start with a little bit of basic definitions as we dig into the content. And start the beginning of this with this idea of a network, because this is all about how networks actually help us accelerate action. But oftentimes when we hear network, we have a lot of different ideas about what that is and what we mean when we say it. So in its most simplest form, a network is really a series of nodes and then relationships between those nodes. What do we mean by nodes? Nodes can be really any unit that you care about. In our case, Second Nature, what we normally do is think about nodes as people or as institutions. And so our role as a network manager is to connect either people together, build relationships between people, or build relationships between institutions. And one of the things you might think of is, are those relationships always the same? Like you're trying to connect people who are alike. And that's actually not the case with network design, at least the way we think about it. Sometimes it's to connect people who are doing similar things, but other times it's actually to connect people who are doing different things. So that's this idea of complementarity. How can we create a network where different types of institutions, different types of individuals who serve different roles at a university, or different universities that serve different roles within the sector can actually be connected together. And by connecting them together, they can do things. And that's how we think about networks, is this idea of nodes that are individuals or institutions, and then relationships between those nodes. How can we build, craft, shape, inform relationships between the nodes in our network? So that's basically what a network is, or how we think about what a network is. And then there's different types of networks, and this is drawn from, we've referenced this a good bit, both internally and on other webinars, from a book called Connecting to Change the World by Pete Plastrick and John Cleveland and Meredith and others. They have identified in that book this idea of 3 different network types. And the first type is called a connectivity network. And you can imagine that as the primary role of the network is actually just to work on those relationships. That is it. That is the primary role, is to have, we have disparate nodes, disparate people or different entities within a network that are not connected together. And we really want to connect them together. That's all we're doing, is connecting them. That's what the relationship is about. Introducing to people who don't know each other, introducing institutions that don't know each other. So this connectivity network is really core to a lot of networks that you all are probably a part of. It's definitely a core part of our network activity. If people aren't connected, then they can't do things together. And so at a base level, really, connectivity networks are pretty ubiquitous across the board. A second type of network, however, really a network function, is called an alignment network. And that's the idea that not only are people connected together, but they're actually directionally working on something that is the same or similar. So they share a goal. In our case, for example, many of the people who signed our climate commitment, they all share this goal towards carbon neutrality in their operations, increase climate awareness for all their students, and increase the amount of climate research. That goal, that alignment goal, is signed by every single institution that are part of those commitments, and they're all the same. And because they're all the same, it allows for people to be pulling in the same direction, and the connectivity that we may have started at the beginning actually can create more synergies between those individuals because they're working on the same goal. So this alignment network is a second type of network function that we see as an important part of our role as facilitating. How can we see who is actually doing something? They share a goal together that we might not know about. We hear about it and we bring them together, and by connecting them together, they'll be able to understand and appreciate what others are doing. And then the third type of network is this idea of a production network. And that at the essence of that is that people are doing things together that they could not accomplish on their own. So not only are they connected, they learn about what someone else is doing. Oh, that's interesting. I may want to do that. Or they're aligned. Hey, I share a goal with somebody, and now we're part of something that's bigger than just my own institution. We're working on towards the same goal, and we're working in parallel towards that same goal. But actually, by virtue of being a part of a network, we're actually able to do something together that we couldn't do on our own. And a kind of a classic example of this in the climate space is some of our smaller schools that don't have a big energy demand on their campus are able to aggregate that demand with other universities that don't have also a utility scale demand. And so these power purchase agreements that have been done, oftentimes the smaller schools really benefit from joining together because they get a deal on that PPA that they couldn't get if they were just doing it on their own. So this idea of a production network doing things together that you couldn't do on their own, that is really important for doing things at scale, either geographic scale or like a scale of magnitude. So I hope that gives you a little bit of our perspective, Second Nature's perspective, of how we think about both what is a network and what network design principles are. And so when we get into this panel and we start to have this discussion, we've asked the panelists to do a little bit of reflecting on what values they find out of either the Climate Leadership Network or other networks they're a part of, and then think about how these different network functions might fit into that. So provide some connection between these ideas, these concepts, and then real world examples. Okay, that's my background. And that's the most I think I'm going to speak in this webinar. It's really a privilege to have 4 different types of institutions represented here on this panel, and then people at those institutions who are coming, I think, at the work from a slightly different perspective, depending on where they're geographically located or what institution type they're from. So what we're going to do to start, you can see their bios here, but I'm going to ask each of the members of the panel to just talk about how they got linked in to our Climate Leadership Network. What was either their institutional journey or what was their personal journey? And I'll just read them out. So we have Ryan McPherson, who's the Director of Sustainability at the University of Buffalo. We have Paula Visconti-Ozripe from she's the Director of Sustainable Development at Tec de Monterrey. Paula, I never say your last name, so I might have said that incorrectly. I'm sorry if I did. We have Yvonne Allen. Sorry. I think I just clicked the wrong thing. Hold on a second. Who's the Executive Director of Student Life at Truckee Meadows Community College. Can I see that again? Am I back? Yeah, okay.
Yep.
And then we have Allison Linder, who's the Sustainability Coordinator at Occidental College out on the West Coast. So Ryan, why don't we start with you? We can just go in order for this one. Ryan, Paula, Yvonne, and Allison. Why don't we start with you, and if you could share a little bit about your journey, how you got here, that'd be great.
Sure. Well, thanks, Tim, and a big thanks to Tim and Meredith, both for your leadership, for Second Nature, and just for advancing this dialogue today. So the University of Buffalo, like many of us on this panel, as well as others, has been, engaged in this work for some time, probably about 5 decades, I think. Really getting into it with Love Canal being, 5-7 miles as the crow flies from campus, and faculty really playing a key role in that, and kind of maturing, or not maturing, but moving forward over decades. And I would say, Tim, the work that you all did in 2006, 7, 8 got us really interested in becoming a member of the network for many of the reasons that you just outlined. And I really like that connectivity, alignment, and production. And I think it was also really a great model because there was a little bit of healthy peer pressure, which was brilliant in terms of, I think, getting CEOs, presidents, et cetera, engaging in the work that maybe otherwise would have taken longer. So around that time, I was in a very different role. I ran our government and community relations office, but was voluntold to kind of play a role in the development of the CAP at that time while in that work. And then we had some really great people leading that. Around 2012, I segued into this role as the Chief Sustainability Officer here at the university. And I would say we went through kind of our work at that point was a little bit more focused on creating the next generation of change agents and direct engagement with our students for 5, 6, 7 years. We continue to do that, obviously, but somewhere in around 2016, we kind of moved a little bit differently, reorganized, and I now report into the Vice President for Finance and Administration here at the university, where we kind of started doubling down, tripling down on our decarbonization work. Those 2 areas are kind of pivotal to, I think, many of your work in this space, as well as ours. So at that time, we really then developed our work and refined kind of our existing climate action plan. And then, of course, we had the wise strategy of rolling it out about a week before COVID, or maybe it was a week after COVID. But over the last 5 years, that's really been a lot of our efforts have been in that decarbonization space and really thinking about what we want to be when we grow up, how we do that. And the relationship with Second Nature has been pivotal on that, from catharticism with fellow colleagues, to kind of figuring out how are you doing this, et cetera, to direct engagement on problem solving, and to even funding and counsel in all of those avenues. So it's been a great journey, with Second Nature on this and thinking about the role that we all play kind of together and how we advance this work through that network model. Thanks, Tim.
Thanks, Ryan. That's great. And it's important to understand, I think, your transition over time, the longevity that you've been there, but you've kind of served in different types of roles, but you've kind of seen it work throughout the university. It's a large, University of Buffalo is a large university, so you bring that perspective. So it's really
Thank you for not saying old, Tim. I appreciate it.
well seasoned.
Longevity.
Well seasoned.
Yeah.
Paula, go ahead.
Hi, thank you, Tim, and good morning, everybody, or afternoon or evening. I guess, well, it's two stories here because Tec de Monterrey, has done, like, as Ryan mentioned, we've done sustainability work for many years. However, I think it was about 2019 when Tec de Monterrey, and just a brief parentheses for those of you who don't know Tec de Monterrey, we are a Mexican private nonprofit university, and we have a campus all over the country, about 100,000 students. So just for some of you to have some context. So in 2019, Tec de Monterrey signed the Race to Zero commitment. And that's when most of, or all of the sustainability work started to come together and to be sort of articulated under one umbrella. So we, in 2021, actually during COVID as well, right? We launched our climate change and sustainability plan with goals for 2025. And this sustainability plan is very comprehensive and it transversal in the sense that it of course it includes mitigation and adaptation efforts, but it also includes other initiatives related to education, research, and engagement. And this is where I come in. So I joined, I came to work here at Tec de Monterrey in 2022. And part of my role as a sustainability engagement manager back then was to see how could we participate in these networks in a very meaningful way, that it could help advance our objectives and the goals that we have set up. So with this role in mind, we signed the Race to Zero commitment, and as a part of Second Nature's role with EAUC and the Race to Zero campaign, we also joined UC3, the University Climate Change Coalition. And in my engagement role, it was I started to participate as a liaison in UC3, and that's where I really started learning a lot about how to engage with other universities in terms of sustainability work and the climate change role in other universities, how other universities were organizing their objectives and their climate action plans. And it really helped focus a lot of our engagement efforts, but also to be able to learn from other universities in other things, such as like the COP process or education or decarbonization, of course. So my current role, then I stepped up as director of sustainability, and I still continue to participate in these networks. But I think part of what and I'm going to talk a little bit more about this in the next question, but I think part of the story here is that as Tec de Monterrey made this commitment, Race to Zero commitment, and then sort of solidified all of these commitments and objectives into a plan, and then has still an engagement piece that's focused on learning from others and making sure that we are, as we say, catalyzing climate action, not just within the university, but outside the university. This is how our participation in other networks, but specifically here with Second Nature and UC3, it has really helped us shape those objectives and helped move us forward.
That's great. So written into the plan itself is external engagement with networks. That's interesting. It'd be interesting for
Yeah.
others to, I'd be curious if others explicitly have done that as part of their planning process. And just so everyone knows, the University Climate Change Coalition is a smaller network that we manage is just research universities. Our ones in the US, and then Mexico and Canada have some other universities. So if you're not familiar with that term, that's what the University Climate Change Coalition is. Yvonne?
Good morning from Reno, Nevada. I'm Yvonne Allen, the Executive Director for Student Life here at Truckee Meadows Community College, and we are the proud community college node of the different climate action networks with Second Nature. We have been doing different sorts of climate and sustainability work over the past couple decades, mainly housed in our facilities department. However, it was about 9 years ago now, 2016, we joined the Second Nature network as part of the resiliency commitment. And it was especially then very rare for a community college to join. Our president, President Karen Hilgersum, was really involved, and she brought a wealth of knowledge about Second Nature and really got us sort of leaping in full throttle ahead. And now fast forward 9 years, our environmental sustainability push has really grown campus-wide, especially for a non-research-based institution. I do think that TMCC in particular, in our involvement with Second Nature, really helped push the climate and social justice lens that Second Nature has today. We purposefully have our environmental sustainability efforts housed under our equity and inclusion efforts on campus to have that lens. And that's something that I know that we bring to the different networks, and it's very unique to our school as well. But I do think that it is a lot of thanks to Second Nature and the different networks and connections we've been able to make that our school has been able to push a lot of non-research-based environmental sustainability efforts. We're the only Green Ribbon School, which is a designation from the U.S. Department of Education. We're the only one in the state of Nevada, which is a really big deal. And we're also the only institution in the state of Nevada that's 100% renewable energy powered. And that was thanks to one of our climate action plan goals that we set with Second Nature. We decided we wanted to move forward with that. We knew as a public institution, it was going to be very difficult for us to really get enough solar or enough wind or buy enough anything to make that happen. But we were able to create a partnership with our local energy company to buy at a subsidized rate credits with them. So a lot of our efforts have really been sparked by having to have these conversations as a community college on how do we move forward in a sort of a different way to create these community partnerships to be able to do environmental justice work and sustainability work, while also engaging our faculty to create this movement in the classroom as well. So we created a position called the Sustainability Advocate. This is an academic faculty member that spearheads our Sustainability Champions Committee and spearheads a lot of different efforts in our classrooms and on campus. We have a really great partnership between student services, academic affairs, and facilities for these sustainability efforts, and it's worked out really great. And I think that TMCC is really a demonstration that even as a public, non-research-based community college, you really can still put environmental sustainability at the forefront and do a lot of really impactful things, not only for our community, but for our students as well.
That's great. I love the fact that you can highlight the role of both students and faculty in kind of the advocate role, but then also just the functioning of TMCC that might be different than like Ryan was describing a little bit of the, post-COVID, really operational decarb was like a big emphasis of theirs. And there's just like different moments I think institutions are going to have that lend themselves to different parts of climate solutions depending on where your institution is at a given time or what institution type you are. Great. Allison, why don't you close us out?
She's frozen for me. I don't know if,
I think she's frozen for me too. All right, maybe.
Okay,
oh,
I'm
there
back.
she is.
There
Hi.
you are.
I was frozen. How frustrating. Sorry. So yeah, hi everyone. I'm Allison Linder. I'm the Assistant Sustainability Director at Oxy. I started at Oxy about 1.5 years ago. I guess a minute about myself. So my background is in urban planning, and prior to coming to Oxy, I worked in transportation planning for a while. But I had always, my dissertation was actually about corporate environmental responsibility. So I kind of always wanted to come back and do sustainability really holistically at an institutional level. And so I'm really excited to be in this role. And, you know, it is really cool in that way that I get to touch on such a variety of different topics. And I'll come back to that later, but that's a really fun part of the job. So about sustainability at Oxy, I think Oxy is known for having, you know, a very liberal culture. And as an urban planner, I had definitely heard about their urban and environmental policy school, which was really interested in sustainability as well as environmental justice type issues. But on the institutional side, there was an Office of Sustainability a while back. And then from 2019 to 2023, when I was hired, it was essentially dormant. It was unstaffed, and a faculty director had a 25% appointment to try to keep things going. But the office was quite, you know, I guess kind of like on the back burner. What I always like to say though is while the Office of Sustainability at Oxy was dormant, sustainability on campus was still very much alive. We have a lot of initiatives with our student clubs and our programs, some academic connections. And essentially what happened leading to the reopening of our office is that this faculty director with the 25% appointment really organized. You know, she kept the engagement and advocacy strong. They formed a committee called Occidental Committee for Climate Equity and Resilience. And essentially after, I think it was either, let's say it was 12 to 18 months, that committee essentially recommended reopening the office, staffing it with 2 people, myself, and I also have an assistant sustainability coordinator. And then part of that committee's recommendation was to sign the climate commitment from Second Nature. So when I started in October 2023, you know, there's a lot of excitement around the final push to get the president to sign. I'd love to take credit for it, but really all the groundwork was laid well before I even joined Oxy. And the timing was actually quite interesting because for health reasons, our president had already announced that he would be stepping down at the end of the fiscal year. So we basically had about, I don't know, 8 months before he left. And so with that uncertainty, the push was real, and we did get him to sign. So he signed in January. And I think that kind of locked us into having like marching orders as we work to develop our plan. So that's where we are now. In terms of my role, I always like to say the Office of Sustainability has 3 buckets. So the first bucket is everything surrounding the plan, collecting our data, getting our baseline, and then doing the planning effort. The second bucket is engagement. So I kind of call that creating a culture of sustainability on campus. So that's all the academics, all the clubs, all the events and programs that we run. And then the final bucket would be operations. So we are situated within facilities. So we do things to kind of try to green our operations at Oxy.
Nice. Thanks, Allison. I love that story about how culture of the institution actually sustained the effort, even though it was almost like the form wasn't there, but the function was there. So like the form following the function eventually made sense. I bet that's a decently common story when there's a lot of transition at many of these institutions.
Yeah,
Okay,
That's a good way
so
to put it.
let's go to panel, and I just want to say, panelists, we're gonna skip the first question because I think we covered a lot of background, and I'm actually more interested in thinking about this idea of what maybe like reciprocity is the best way of describing it. How do you contribute? A lot of people come into a network and say, here's the thing I want to get out of it. Like I'm grabbing this stuff. But Paula, as you described, it was part of your plan and intention was to be a part of networks. Like that by design was something you wanted to be a part of. And I would love to hear from your different perspectives. How do you think about giving to networks, contributing to networks as much as you get out of networks? And maybe even in the act of giving, it is a get, of course, but would love to hear some of the stories that you might have about ways you've contributed, and by contributing, you're actually meeting, whether it's an internal goal or you're able to accomplish something by that. And anyone can start.
I'll jump in. Thanks, Tim. Thanks for choosing the harder question, not the easier question. I kind of, it made me think of Adam Grant's book, Givers and Takers. And I feel like in this relationship with Second Nature, at times I'm more of a taker than a giver. But I do, as I was reflecting on this, I think there's a couple different angles here. The first one is, if you take a really, really macro big picture on this, no matter how successful any of our campuses are, the bottom line is that's not going to solve the problem. And that if our real goal here is creating a livable climate, thinking about that within that context of the network is kind of everything, right? While my little part is the University at Buffalo, that's not going to get us to the goal, obviously. And so I kind of keep that in my head when thinking about Second Nature, because it is that macro goal. We've been both givers and takers over the last several years with Second Nature. And I think our main giving has been, kind of presenting and sharing, whether that's at the summit or webinars like this or many other pieces of, how we fail forward to kind of prevent you from taking the painful path, right? And in many cases, sure, the successes, but also which road gave us a lot of trouble or a lot more resistance, and how do we limit the amount of that kind of, transaction for all of us. And I know I've been the beneficiary of that from a lot of my colleagues in this network as well. So decarbonization pathways specifically, are kind of laid out with a lot of those challenges. And there are a lot of similar themes and ways to kind of work through those things. So whether it was IRA funding or whether it was, thinking about PPAs, purchase power agreements, things of that nature, I think having that conversation and talking about the places where we failed and succeeded. I also think we've helped shape some of the summits in the past 2 years of kind of framing the agenda. I think the Second Nature team does a great job of obviously setting the table, but I think they do an even better job of bringing people in who are at the campus level, who have more direct, association with those issues, at least from that perspective of helping set that. And so there's a great advisory team that works on that with the entire Second Nature squad to kind of frame those things out. So those are the ones that kind of come to my mind.
Yeah, and Yvonne, you mentioned the, justice specifically. I feel like TMCC has really contributed a lot for our understanding about that. Did you want to speak to, and specifically in the summit even, but in a bunch of other ways. You want to speak to that a little bit?
100%. Yeah, I think adding on to what Ryan said, those climate leadership summits, being able to bring all the different institutions together, not only in the planning, but then in the execution and in the sessions, is a really wonderful way that I know our institution has been able to use our on-campus expertise on these environmental justice lenses to encourage our partners, even with Second Nature, to push themselves, right? If you remember even the climate justice summits 9 years ago or so, they were wonderful. They were very environmental focused. They were very renewable energy. They were very, divestment focused. And I think that over the last 9 years, with a lot of us being very vocal, it has really helped lead Second Nature on like using multiple lenses when we're talking about environmental sustainability. So I think that's one thing that TMCC for sure has been able to bring with our involvement with Second Nature. And we've been able to sort of be empowered by this a bit and extend that into our community collaborations and our community partnerships as well. We're really highly involved with this local nonprofit called Keep Truckee Meadows Beautiful. And it's all about, environmental sustainability, keeping our river and our lakes clean in our areas. And we have used this same social justice lens that we have sort of piloted with Second Nature and are now using that with our local community to engage in justice practices, even for environmental sustainability. So for example, with the big community cleanups, we talk about, well, are there free buses that happen to be able to get folks to these areas that, everyone wants to help their neighborhoods? How do we get them there for free, right? Is there free parking? Are we going to feed them? Are we going to give them free gloves? Are we going to do all these things that most of us maybe don't think about? Maybe, some folks don't have a pair of jeans that they can dirty up when they're picking up trash out of the river, right? So can we be able to provide for folks who want to help in our local community, especially with the community college, our mission being for our local community? So I think that not only with our community using our faculty and staff with their practicality, some of our community college research is focused on like bobcat research and things of that sort. So having a sustainable lens on conservation for our area especially is how we're able to really connect with the different networks and things of that sort, and panels like this, right, Tim? Being able to connect the university, connect the international institution, all these different things, I think are a really great way for community colleges to be able to be involved.
I love the idea of testing, being able to have a little bit of a sandbox or a testing ground, and maybe networks can be a part of that. And I want to be clear, it's not an advertisement for the Climate Leadership Network, but because you're members, you're talking about that experience. And there's tons, I think, that we could learn, and we try to be really responsive to, in Yvonne, the way you were describing years and years ago. Hopefully you've seen us, change our practice, improve support, connect people in different ways based on the experiences and feedback. Paula, I guess I'm curious from your perspective as an international, a school that isn't a US-based school, what does that contribution look like? Does it feel different? Is it the same? Like how would you describe it?
I think there's a lot of similarities, but I think for us at Tec de Monterrey, I think one of the things that we realized and we've been thinking a lot about is, we see ourselves as very privileged in the sense that we are a Mexican institution, but we do have people within Tec de Monterrey sort of dedicated to participating in these networks, and a sustainability team that's working on our objectives and our goals in terms of all of our sustainability work. So that's not something that every Mexican or Latin American institution has. So part of our reflection has been, how can we make sure that everything that we learn, and by participating in these international networks and the spaces that we have been able to have at COPS and like the network of networks, how can we utilize these spaces to also contribute to our local communities, like Yvonne said, but also to other Mexican and Latin American institutions? So there's a lot of, I don't know if there's something specific right now that I can mention, but there is a lot of work sort of being done towards making sure that all of these resources that are available for US and European institutions are also available for Mexican and Latin American institutions. Sometimes it's just translating or just having webinars like these, but having them in Spanish so that other universities can join. Or if there's going to be a panel or something, instead of Tec de Monterrey being there, why not have another university or another representative being in these conversations? I think maybe a more specific example can also be through UC3, and we applied, or through Second Nature, we applied to the Catalyst grant. And I think I've spoken to this example several times, but we applied for the Catalyst grant, and we applied so that we could replicate a lot of the work that we do in global networks in the Mexican context. Because also as a Mexican institution, we've learned a lot, but there's just things you just can't apply. It's just a very different context, like geographically, politically, in terms of the resources. So we are using that grant. We started a Mexican network of universities, public and private universities that are in the north, south of the country. And we're hoping to have, at the end of May, a gathering of the presidents of the universities so that we can start also like this collaboration specific to climate action. So, and also working towards COP, how can we ensure that there's more representation from Latin American universities, COP30, that it's going to be in Brazil. So I guess that's some of the things that we're trying to do, is just making sure that we use the spaces that we have, the privilege of being in these spaces and having people dedicated to this work, translate to others within the country and also in Latin America.
Yeah, great. Allison, any thoughts on this? I mean, you're probably the newest of the group, so like what does it look like, has looked like for you so far to contribute back to something that you just joined?
Yeah. Sure. Here I am today, and the token new representative. No, I was really, honored when Meredith reached out about this. So very happy to be here today. Also, we had the good fortune of I think the last year's Second Nature conference being right in our backyard in Anaheim. So we were able to attend that and, kind of get to learn more about what the organization was all about. This isn't necessarily through Second Nature, but there is a great listserv of, I guess it's kind of Southern California or maybe all of California climate officers at different, universities and colleges. So that's been like a great network to have dialogue with, not really peer institutions, because a lot of them are much bigger than Oxy, but I guess to have dialogue with people who have been working in this field for longer, and we kind of exchange ideas, and I think I've been able to show up there fairly well, whether it's asking a question or just kind of attending a group meeting or dialogue or learning from that really engaged group of people. I guess I think when I think about networks and kind of giving back, it's really interesting to be here today because my focus has really been about creating those networks within our campus, which I think is, it is an important part of the job. Like I said, my presence at Oxy is driven by interest in the community of having an Office of Sustainability and having a climate pledge. So it really is bottom up. And so I find that I'm investing a lot of my energy in kind of creating those networks within our campus and creating opportunities for people to connect. One of the things I always like to say is that there's a nexus with sustainability for everyone on campus. And so we've really been trying to kind of uncover that. With Earth Month, for example, we had about 30 events this year. It was a cross section of, the usual suspects of campus ecology tours and plant pottings, but we also had some collaborations with religious studies, with Oxy Arts, with the staffing. We have like it's called the Fun Committee to engage staff in community building, so co-sponsoring things with them. And so I think like most of my focus has really been on those internal network and developing that and finding ways to connect people within the college, because they do have great ideas and they need to work together to make them happen. Our office can't take it on all on our own.
Yeah.
It's an interesting point, and I think one that probably resonates with a lot of people, that the internal to campus work itself is more than a full-time job for people. So the fact that you're doing stuff or contributing to a network outside of the institution, unless it's really, you can see some, benefit to your internal work, it's always going to be a little bit of a tension there and trying to navigate the balance. I also would wonder about this idea of, you all are at different institution types. And Ryan, I think you might have mentioned the ability to leverage the peer pressure. Does that work when the peer isn't the same institution type as you? Or is there, and Yvonne, like you're a community college, if you do something and Ryan hears about it, but it's not in Ryan's peer and aspirant group or vice versa, does that change the dynamic of the network value that this positive peer pressure could create? Do you understand that question?
For sure. I know that I think that the community college being interwoven with a lot of initiatives with the universities and research we're presented with items that we would have never thought about or considered. Being a B campus, we're the only B campus USA in the state of Nevada. That came from a university, honestly, a elevator run-in during a Second Nature meeting, where someone had a little bee pin on a faculty member had a bee pin on their lapel, and I was like, we want to do that, and now we have a whole pollinator garden. So I think the community colleges benefit from interacting with different types of institutions, because there's some things that are just outside of our purview we wouldn't even thought as a possibility.
Yeah, I love that. I think all healthy peer pressure is good. I do think though, Tim, it certainly resonates more with leadership when it is against or with those peers that we are quote unquote competing for. I think the dirty little secret in sustainability climate land is that all of us are actually very, very friendly, and maybe the word competition never really comes up in the sense that we're all driving for the same thing, right? Again, we don't win unless we do this, but I think our institutions, right, sometimes we do have a little bit of that sense of competition for enrollment and things of that nature. And so keeping up with the Joneses or fear of being left out, I don't love leading with it, but it's an incredibly effective tool. And I think I've had conversations, Yvonne, at that same summit where we are openly talking about, okay, what can I use that you're doing to go back to my university, right? To be able to say, hey, look, we're not keeping pace. And that's the way human nature works, right? So I think it's a very effective way for colleagues to kind of leverage one another through that network of connectivity, maybe in that case, or maybe it is alignment.
Paul, I saw you nodding your head. Does that resonate? That, hey, they're doing it. Can we do it too? We should be doing it too. Is that?
No, definitely. I think especially now that we're working more with Mexican universities, I think one of the things that has helped us out also is like, hey, they're doing it over there. Why aren't we doing it here? And then within the network, there's other Mexican universities that have said, hey, like maybe showing that we're working with you and that you guys are doing all of this work can help us push within our institution and saying, hey, all of these other universities are doing it. Why aren't we there? So definitely.
Yeah. Well, it seems like we have, since we span we can see kind of some of those areas of the upper administration and the story that I always tell is there was one senior leader who, they're in this president's council version of that on, their climate goals, and they're going around the table and they're like, we're just, we're going to do this because we want to get the right ranking, and the president said, no, 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 we're just doing it because it's the right thing to do. It's just the right thing to do. That's why we're doing it. And at the end of the meeting, he pulls the person aside who was talking about the ranking. He's like, hey, make sure we're in the top 5 of that ranking, by the way. So it's like he couldn't help himself. It's like regardless, there's always going to be kind of that, okay, what are my peer institutions doing, or are these other institutions doing? How do I rank against them?
And if the strategy of it was the right thing to do was the most effective strategy, we would not be having this conversation, right? Not to be negative, right? But there are other things that need to be aligned for prioritization purposes.
Yeah. So I guess I'd like to think about, as we kind of wrap up a little bit, the future looking role of networks in helping accomplish both goals that you might have or goals that society might have. And I would wonder, we're always trying to learn and think about both months ahead, years ahead, what can we do better? Have you seen things either at Second Nature that you'd be like, oh man, why don't you guys do more of that? Like, why aren't you doing 5 times as many of those as what you do now? Or, why are you doing that? Like, really stop doing that. Like, that doesn't benefit us at all. I would love to hear a little bit of dialogue around things that you find that we could be seeing happen, or that you would love to see happen in your perfect world. Understanding the context right now is wild, but there might be an opportunity during periods of this disruption to think about, different modes of operating. And Allison, can we just start with you on, as you think about future, you're new to the network, you'd love to see this happen more, and whatever this is, would love to hear what that is.
Yeah, sure. So I'll start with a practical thought, and then I'll also add a really aspirational thought. I think one of the things I alluded to before is that as a sustainability officer, you have to wear so many hats. And so I find that the things that I'm lacking confidence in are not the things that are sustainability oriented. They're the things that would like support the role and make me more effective. So I think there's a lot of advances with technology that I need to learn more about. So things with like data management and data visualization platforms and how to automate things so that they're more streamlined. So I think thinking a little bit outside the box and like what kind of trainings would serve those skills that like, you don't necessarily get in sustainability, but would assist sustainability. Similarly, like building infrastructure. I mean, I've actually tapped in a lot to US Green Building Council for that. So I don't think you need to replicate the wheel, but I find that, communicating with like our HVAC tech is like a new area for me. So kind of having that expertise. But honestly, I think a lot of it is like using the new tools. And so I think my practical suggestion would be like having kind of an ask the expert, like an office hour, or having like a listserv where kind of similar to that Southern California network I mentioned earlier, where you can put out something like, hey, has anyone ever used this Energy Star Portfolio Manager, which is not a very intuitive program, but sometimes we need to use. And kind of cracked that program. I don't know how to use this program. So a lot of it is like, I think, supporting skills. And then while I have the mic, I kind of wanted to put forth like a more grandiose idea when I think about networks. But I think one of the broader societal problems that's kind of come to my attention in, the last year or so is like social media and, kind of how are we educating people? How are people getting news? There's a great book by Jonathan Haidt about how social media impacts youth. And when I really think about it, like that's an environmental problem as well. Like how are people connecting with their devices and learning things, not to mention the broad swath of energy that all these devices consume. So, I almost think of it like, what are the networks between fields that need to be developed? Like the child psychologists who are concerned about kids' use of social media and, could work with the sustainability folks about how are we like teaching people about climate change on social media, or how can we put more truth in social media? I feel like these are questions that probably none of us really have the time to work on day to day. But if we were to think about like, how can we network beyond our little bubble to really put resources into a really big problem, that would be something aspirational I would put out there.
It's a good point. And I think one that we've tried to do in the recent years is to expand this idea of climate leadership beyond just operational decarbonization. It is that, but it's also much more holistic than that. Maybe just in the last minute or so, can Ryan, Paula, Yvonne go around and just say the one thing, I have my wizard hat on, I want to like wave the wand. What does that look like that you would love to have happen?
I know that my couple, if I had the hat on, something a regional network, I think would be really beneficial. Second Nature does a really wonderful job at all of us sort of nationwide being connected, but West Coast just has some different challenges. So I think that would be great, having some sort of regional network opportunity. And even though I love always being connected to the universities and larger research partners, having a community college network might be something that benefits as well. We try to find each other at the leadership summits, but it might be nice just to have some separate webinars or separate initiatives just for us.
Great. Heard. Ryan? Oh, Paula. Yeah.
Sure.
Go.
Sure. I think I agree with Allison about what she's saying, and I was just thinking about AI and sustainability, and it's a conversation that also just started here at university as well. But I'm still also trying to figure out how to continue to meaningfully participate in these networks. So I think there's a lot of things that Second Nature and other networks put forward that we might not be using to its full potential. So I think sometimes having just the time to explore I think for Second Nature, I think it would be like just putting forward all of the opportunities, just putting it out there so that we can also learn more about how to participate more. I think if you give more resources, sometimes it's just a lot of things and it's really hard to navigate and how to participate, when to participate. So for me right now, it's like, if it's one more thing, I don't know if I'm going to be able to just dive into it, but it's just, I think we're still trying to see how we can use all of these resources in a better way.
So maybe a curation, like a curated role directed at.
Maybe, yeah, something
maybe.
like that. Yeah. I mean, I can think of other things that we're still working on that we would love to learn. And I think networks would be a great way. Second Nature would be a great way of helping us also how to work with our local communities more. But there are so many things out there that I think first take advantage of what is already there for us.
I'll bring us home with yesterday or the weekend was the draft. So I'll give us an analogy here. I'd say on defense, kind of advance the subnational agenda. America's all in, right? There's more population represented by states that are advancing climate action right now than the opposite, right? So I think on that, really leaning into that. I think the offense side of this is we need to take a page out of what has happened over the last 100 days in terms of the deregulation in the climate space. Well, there was a plan for that. It was Plan 2025 and many other things that were put together. Where is our equivalent? And are we thinking about the time that we have right now to putting a positive vision of how we address climate action that can be rolled out when that window presents itself? And I think that's really important for us to think about.
Great. Meredith, I was going to answer this question. If you can just close this out, maybe there's one in the chat.
Sure thing. Well, it's right on the hour, but just wanted to say thanks so much to all of our panelists. And I think it's really valuable for us to get together and talk about networks and network design. Maybe we should do this more often, and the way that colleges and universities in and of themselves are stewarding networks. We do a lot of internal thinking at Second Nature about how to make networks effective, and even sharing some of that thinking might benefit our members too. That's my big aha during this webinar. But also just wanted to close out by saying, if you're not a member of Second Nature and you're considering, we are offering a 50% off discount for new members during Earth Month. And we continue to extend our dues waiver to HBCUs and tribal colleges. So I hope that you'll take this opportunity to consider joining the network and thinking about what you can get, but also what you can give. To the points made in this webinar, I'm going to put my email in the chat so that you have access to me if you have any questions. And just thanks so much to everyone for being here. Thank you, Tim, for moderating, and thanks to all of our panelists for being with us today.
Thanks all. Have a good week.
Take care. Bye-bye.